What was your inspiration for, School of War? Where does it all come from?
I guess it's going to sound pretty insincere if I just go ahead and explain exactly where it came from, but it came from a video game. Because I've been playing this game, Jedi Knight 3 Jedi Academy, since I was about 11 years old. And I met my best friend, Mike Ward, on there, or one of my best friends, and he and I used to play that game literally nonstop every single day. So that game meant a lot to us, and I still play that game to this day. It's been 10 years or so, or almost 10 years, if not 10 years, and I've been playing that game constantly ever since. And I remember about 4 years ago, I bought it on the PC because they shut down the Xbox servers. And I went onto the server list, and after about a year playing it on PC, I found this server called the School of War. And I was never very good at the combat in the game, but the combat in the game was very precise, and it depended a lot on footwork and your understanding of like the mechanics of the game and the mechanics of swordplay in general. So that was what was so endearing about the game, was the fact that you could literally move to the left and your character would strike to the left, and it wasn't just like you're pressing XXY to do a cool combo. And I always loved that about the game. But School of War was a server, it was a community of people that were taking martial arts philosophies and applying it to the mechanics in the game. And so there were a lot of people that were a million times better than anyone else in the game. And it was because they learned this sense of control and honor and chivalry and applied it to the game. And it made the whole system just feel that much more like, I don't know, I just felt immersed in what they were doing. And I talked to the main person that I first met. His name was Bardox, and he was from Australia, and he was walking me through the halls, and he showed me this archive room. And it was when I was introduced to this quote, flow with what is, which is Bruce Lee's philosophy. It was Jeet Kune Do. And I'd never been exposed to any of that world before on such an authentic level, even if you can't say authentic, but it, that was the first time I was ever exposed to it, really. And I just started studying the philosophies behind everything, and I found myself sucked into it. And I would spend like hours a day on top of these training poles that they had, just practicing the basic swings over and over again, because that's how you learned your muscle memory. Even if it was just in your fingers, you were still learning the muscle memory capable to, perfect your mind and kind of reach a level of zen that you wanted. So with that, that was kind of the background behind the foundation of what the school is, because it's just about learning control and learning to achieve zen and learning a sense of honor and respect and things like that.
So, what was your inspiration for the major fight scene?
The fight in general was inspired by Edward Zwick, and the film itself, the way I went about approaching it was a lot like the way Mark Romanek or Doug Liman would approach a film. So I wanted it to all feel really organic, and I wanted it to feel like I built a world, and I just knew that there were certain steps that I needed to make sure that it actually felt like a real world and not just this contrived like it because I told you to kind of thing.
Yeah, well, we really did get a feel of that. I mean, I actually felt that you created the red skies as well, or that you created a organic atmosphere that your characters live within, and I felt driven to watch these characters and see them interact with each other in this essentially School of War. Now, my questions are going to be around cinematography. I must ask, because obviously as someone who's interested in this, how did you manage to do all the I know all the effects of obviously the lightsaber effect is obviously it's one that interests me, but was that After Effects or something similar to that?
Yeah, well, the lightsabers, I did hand-drawn rotos a lot of the time, but some of it was using plugins and whatnot to make sure that, I guess, it light-wrapped accordingly to the subjects and whatnot. So, because I didn't want it, I didn't know what I was gonna do with the lightsabers because I wanted it to feel like the original trilogy. That was how it always was supposed to feel. I loved like the look of like Luke's colored core or Vader's colored core in Empire, where they just had that slight tint of blue or red in the core, and it wasn't just this hot white kind of thing. And the prequels were a lot more like, you know, hot white and clear and crisp. And I wasn't sure if I wanted that, but as I started moving into it, I you know, and got further into the fight, I realized, especially since I shot on ProRes raw 4K, like, or not ProRes, you know, ignore that. When I shot it on raw 4K, I had to find a new workflow because not everything was shot on that format, and that was a really high format. So I had to move away from hand-drawn rotoscoping to just full-on plugins. And I just realized that it would probably be better for the exposure and for the film in general if you just had, like, you know, something as literal as a hot white core amidst all this other thing. As long as it doesn't, like, distract or blend in too much with the highlights of the image.
What made you decide to do the, obviously you had the red skies and the blue tints. What was your motivation behind that? As a director, what were you hoping to achieve with the audience with that? Was it to create try and create this new alien atmosphere that is definitely not somewhere on Earth?
Well, that's kind of just a byproduct, really. It's about color and the fact that color creates a very cognitive effect with you, and you begin to subconsciously associate colors with certain things. And Brittany's saber, her lightsaber is yellow, and there's a lot of yellow in most images where he's thinking about her or when she's on the verge or things like that. You know, if he's thinking about her, chances are yellow is in the frame. And if, you know, if there's an intense thing going on, if it's associated with Ernesto's character, the main antagonist, I guess you could call him, there was always blue in the frame, you know, and there's more so blue in the frame if, you know, he's there. But the more intense the film got, the hotter the colors went. But I just tried to make sure, and I banged my head against the wall 1,000 times trying to make sure that the beiges and the teals were married in a way that, like, you still felt like there was a cohesive color palette, but I still had room to explore and have fun with a red sky because I really wanted a freaking red sky. Everybody was telling me, you know, oh, that's not, well, not everybody, but like Jesse and my cinematographer, Austin McCarty, were like, you know, you really should be careful about that because, you know, it's not realistic. I was like, I'm not necessarily trying to go for something realistic because it's a lightsaber fight and there's nothing real about that. I'm trying to make sure that the characters and their relationships feel organic, not necessarily the planet, you know?
You've managed to take an area which it could only be somewhere on Earth, but it definitely doesn't look earthly. It also doesn't look like you're anywhere near a city. It looks remote, and I think you've done a fantastic job in really creating this feel of seclusion. Especially with the rapids, with the waterfall, or whatever that is, the river. And I have to ask, was that location chosen to mimic Bruce Lee's quote?
No, or is that just... to some degree, but I really actually wanted a huge waterfall, so that would have been a much more literal translation, and we looked everywhere. And in Georgia, there's plenty of places. There's like this Minnehaha waterfall, and it's pretty cool, but it's impossible to fight on because the rocks are slippery, even if you had like non-slip hiking boots. Imagine falling on your back on those. Ooh. So I had to make sure that, like, if we were going to have him flip, we had to have him flip on, you know, some soft bedding underneath the water. But yeah, the thing about the environments in general is when you see the film, you feel like you're kind of in a unfamiliar place. You feel like there's a lot of culture behind it to some degree, that's just kind of settled in to the roots and the soil of the location. You don't, you just feel like there's more here.
Yeah, and
And I
there's definitely
think
more on the show.
that's how I felt when I first joined the server. When I first got on the server, because they took like a normal Tatooine map and modded the hell out of it. And it had like roots overgrowing the place, and there was, grass everywhere. And so I wasn't used to the map looking like that naturally. I think they just took the old assets from different maps and just like found a way to mod it into the the place. And I was kind of transported to this new environment, but there were these training poles and there were these, stone statues that I'd never seen on that map before. So I was just kind of like, this is not my comfort zone. But it's at the same time, I feel comfortable with immersing myself in it and figuring out why those stone temples are there and why the, training poles are there. So
Allows for the viewer to put their own bit of, oh, I wonder what that's there for.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, why is he training and practicing his basic swings on that totem?
Yeah, and also why does he have an antagonist? Why does he have someone who doesn't like him? In terms of filming, how was that on you as a director, the actors, and also how did it work from an editing standpoint?
Well, it was always just supposed to be a fight. It was just supposed to be a 3-minute fight or so. I wasn't sure how long it was going to be, but then I realized that I really wanted to apply some tension to it, because otherwise the fight would just be kind of like just a pretty little fight, and it wouldn't mean anything even if I added my own emphasis on things. So I had to build a world around it regardless of what I, originally thought, and kind of expanded it out to what it is now, which is like an 10 minute, 30 seconds films, because that's actually the length. It stops at 10:30. We shot the majority of the film on a GH4, but I had my buddy Austin McCarty, who I shot a feature film with. I was his second AC. He came in from Missouri to shoot the fight and a few other scenes with his Blackmagic, and we shot those on Zeiss lenses and some really good cinema lenses. And it looked great, but it was a totally different viewpoint, or not viewpoint. It was a totally different workflow from like just grabbing a GH4 and adjusting the settings and going. I mean, you had to really think about everything, because on a camera of that quality, when you're shooting in raw 4K, that's 700 gigabytes of memory, and that's so much data that's being used, but also that's so much detail that you have to get right that I wasn't used to. So I had to really be careful about that. And my mind was in like 20,000 different places when we shot it. And I had a tent set up outside of the shore right behind everything, and it was filled with snacks and towels and whatnot, because I knew as soon as Jesse landed in that water, he'd have to go after about 15 minutes into that tent, take off his clothes and dry off, and then put on new clothes, because it was 10 degrees in that water, 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Jeez. And it was freezing, and he could have gotten hypothermia in about 20 minutes. So we knew that we had to have everything planned out really well. And I knew from the beginning I wanted him flipped into water. So we choreographed the fight, and we planned the fight for about 5 months before we ever shot it, So I just knew exactly what I wanted from the fight. It was just about making sure that it was safe, and it felt like the fight characterized the people. Like I wanted to make sure that each cut mattered. And each swing, each attack or defensive action from either one of them was coming from an honest place within each character. I wasn't worried about flourishes or anything crazy like that. I wanted it to have its own sense of Zan Shen, and I wanted it to have its own sense of honor. I didn't want it to just go by basic martial, influences, but there is a lot of influences into the fighting style that we kind of developed, because it's not one particular style. It takes from kendo a lot, but it also takes from just various different influences that I had to make sure that, like, if somebody does a right side cut, they do it the same way every single time, and they dedicate their entire body and mind to that cut, and they don't jerk away or anything like that. They just dedicate everything to that one cut. They cut, and then they move back and reset. And then they vertically slice, and they cut back and reset. And so when you see the fight, you'll notice that they dedicate everything to each cut. Even if they've got an opening, they're dedicating everything. They're always going to be open, so they go for that cut, and they have to be very honest in that cut, and they have to be honest with themselves when they move their body accordingly like that. And but it also had to feel honest to the characters, and I was thinking about that constantly. So even though it seems very anticlimactic and kind of stripped down, it's like that for a reason, because it never once feels out of character. It all felt really natural. It felt like Jesse was inexperienced, and it felt like Ernesto had more control. Even in the way he held his blade, there was just more control,
Okay, so obviously this is the first piece of work I've seen where you're actually not in it.
Yeah, thank God.
But your presence could definitely still be felt. So, as a director, how did this push you?
See, I hate my dialogue a lot. I've never really liked it. I wish at the time for Intractable I had somebody else writing the script, but I think my dialogue is just way too literal and on the nose, and it's even literal in this, but it's not distractingly literal. And so, I don't know, as a director, I just kind of wanted to see what I could do as a visual medium and, take everything without exposition and let the visuals tell the story, because it's film, and film is a moving picture. It's a motion picture. And I wanted to utilize that because I feel like a lot of films now are moving into the era of exposition and, transparent exposition and kind of like just telling us way too much. There are a lot of great films that don't have to do that, but, I just wanted to make sure that I knew how to visually tell a story. I wanted you to feel something just through the visuals and feel like there's actually a narrative that's being threaded together in front of you, so that it didn't feel like I was just telling you about it and pandering into you. And I think Paul Thomas Anderson is a big influence on that mindset for me.
Good few years ago now, you did Intractable. In those 2 years, what have you learnt since production finished?
Since Intractable? God, so much. Because, I've been working on School of War for 11 months because I just decided I'd put everything I knew into that film. So I don't know if I can necessarily narrow it down to one specific kind of thing, but or a few other little bullet list kind of things. But I feel like School of War kind of shows if any growth. It shows that growth, and it's in the way it's put together. But I feel like I've learned how to pull performances a lot better because since working on Marvel Knights and whatnot, I've only really ever directed 2 or 3 scenes in that, and it was when Peter was upset. And we love Sammy. He plays Peter. We love him, but we all know, and he knows, that he's not a great actor. And the scenes where he had to cry or get really upset with, Gwen's death, it was almost like a light turned on for me, and it was like, I know exactly how to make a sad Peter. I was like, that's not hard for me. So when I got on that set and I helped them out, I remember distinctly that one of the first things when it finally came to the fact that Sammy had to be upset, and I learned this on the Reagan set too, on the first feature that I was ever on, that I was more on a creative side of things. I wasn't the kind of person that could work as a gaffer or a grip. I had to be on the creative team in some aspect, or still on the skeleton crew, but constantly making revisions to the script and things like that, that kind of thing. And with Marvel Knights, we had a scene where Harry and Peter were talking, and Peter starts to get really upset because Harry brings up Gwen, and when they first shot this scene, because their hard drive crashed, the first time they ever shot that scene, Sammy apparently looked like he was about to start laughing because he was just uncomfortable. And I decided I was going to create the kind of atmosphere that I felt on my first feature set that was just kind of like strictly professional. So when we got there, I looked at Sammy, was like, all right, come with me for a minute because I'm gonna help you, you know. And I was like, Jesse, you good with me? And he was like, yeah, sure. And he was setting up, you know, camera angles and whatnot, and like the lighting and all that. And then I went to him, I was like, he was like set dressing the room. And I was like, all right. Yeah, I kind of got into his head. I was like, look, you know, you just lost everything. You have nothing. You don't, you know, like, have you ever lost anything before? And he was like, no, not really. He's like, I've always been a pretty normal kid, you know, everything's been okay. And that was when I was like, huh. And I sat down for a minute, and then I came back to him. I said, do you feel like a failure? And he was like, yeah, kind of, sometimes. I was like, go in there, look at yourself in the mirror, and call yourself a failure. And he went in there, and I slammed the door behind him in the bathroom, and everybody went, shit. I turned around, I was like, it's for the best. And then he comes out, and the whole air in the room is thickened so much that when he finally performed, the performance was so, like, that scene alone in episode 3 feels real, you know? It felt like real emotion. It felt like two people genuinely having a heart-to-heart, for me at least. And I thought that was really cool to see that I was capable of doing that. And I think that's kind of where my strength is getting into the heart and kind of the getting into the core of these characters and why they're motivated the way they are, and kind of finding a way to project that onto the screen in the purest sense, you know. And I think Jesse is incredible with action, and we just talked about this the other day. You know, if there are things where he needs really good, you know, dramatic tension or just a good scene of dialogue and he wants me to pull performances, I'll do that. But if I ever need action, he'll do it because he does great action, you know. And I think that's just where my strengths lies. I'm not the next George Miller, but I don't necessarily have to be, you know.
Well, one thing which definitely shows in all of your pieces that I've seen is you're very good at creating the dramatic, the emotional, and the raw, powerful scenes. After Intractable, you started pushing yourself away from Spider-Man because, quite frankly, you were sick of him. And honestly, would not blame you for that one, because I would be too if I sunk so much into a fan film.
Yeah, it wasn't just a fan film. It was Spider-Man Lost Cause. Here's the thing about the fan film community. You know, they're fine and all, but I've made a web series for them. You know, I didn't personally go out of my way to produce it, right? But I've been a part of that, and I helped create that. And so that's a 5-part web series you're getting from me and Jesse and all them. But I'm still, you know, there, and I'm in it in a few scenes.
And fans are very, very critical.
Yeah, well, and that's fine. But the fact is I'm giving them the content. I'm still giving them Spider-Man content. It's like, so what else do they want? Because I gave them Spider-Man Lost Cause, and that's gotten like 7 million views. And then Marvel Knights has that pilot that's got like 8 million views. And the episodes are getting like 50,000 to 100,000 views. I have 100,000 views on Intractable. So, well, disregard that. Ignore the views. But, you know, I gave them Lost Cause, Marvel Knights, and Intractable, and they still want more. And that's what bothers me, is that I can't just go away from it. Because as soon as I post a new trailer for, like, you know, School of War, I immediately get negative stats. Like, I get dislikes almost right off the bat. It's just because it's not Spider-Man. And I hate that. You know, that's my only issue, is that they want more. And they don't seem to realize that I've given them more, and I've given them everything that I'm willing to give at this point. And if they don't want to watch a 5-part web series or a 30-minute short film or a 2.5-hour-long feature film, I don't know what else to give them, because that's literally every single type of domain that you possibly can give of this specific type of character, you know? The only next logical step is making a graphic novel, and I don't want to do that. You know, I want to move on.
Yeah, with Intractable, sorry to go back to that one.
No, it's fine.
But with Intractable, you created something which no other fan film has done. Yes, obviously people have tried to do the gritty Peter Parker, but they always fail because they always have Spider-Man still being the being the chirpy, over the top, funny guy. But when you did your Peter Parker Spider-Man, you had depth. You had one of the most complicated characters. I mean, we always have. I mean, to quote myself, so somewhere in the piece, you have a Peter Parker who follows the old archetype of keeping his issues, you know, blaming himself, holding himself responsible for everything, but keeping it all bottled up, keeping it all within himself until he starts becoming withdrawn and harsh.
Yeah.
Until you.
Well. Sorry to cut you off.
That's fine.
I gravitate toward that character because he handles situations in the same way that I do, and he sucks at being a superhero. I mean, he's awful at it. Everyone he loves dies, but he doesn't stop. He doesn't quit. Even though it may get to him sometimes, he perseveres and he's resilient enough because he knows what's right and what's wrong, and he knows he has to do what's right anyways. And I just kind of looked at the character, and I looked at myself, and I realized that Peter Parker would handle this in reality, in real life. He would handle this loss and this hole in his heart the way I'm handling it. And so it may seem out of character in a lot of ways. It may not even feel like a Spider-Man film in a lot of ways, you know? But it really truly is exactly, in my opinion, how Peter Parker would handle this, because he still feels that sense of responsibility on these things, and he still feels that apathy, but it's on a different, more muted level. Whereas if he lost everything, you know, in which case my mom was basically everything. If he loses everything for himself and he feels that sense of numbness and just kind of like he's never going to get out of this hole of dread, I just feel like he would allow it to turn him into this harsher, you know, character, because that's what I was. I became a very hard-shelled, trenchant individual, and it wasn't really anybody else's fault, and they all tried to help me, but I just didn't want help. I would, you know, and Peter Parker is he's probably his own worst enemy, and in a lot of ways, I'm my own worst enemy, and so that's how I identify with him, and that's what makes me fall in love with the character so much, you know? Because, like, it's not necessarily, like, the action or anything like that, although you can't deny that, like, Spidey fighting Vulture is awesome. There's nothing cooler, but, you know, and I wouldn't want to watch any other superhero fights, like, unless it's, like, Spidey fighting, like, his arch nemesis is, but, like, you know, that's not what is important to me, and I think that's what's important to a lot of other people. And so when they see Intractable, they see that there's really not, you know, any action. It's just like a drama, and they they check out because maybe those qualities of Spider-Man aren't interesting to them, you know, quite as much. Maybe they're just more into the fantastical aspects of it. And I guess people could make the argument that Intractable is more style over substance, but I don't really think so. I think there's a lot of style and flair to it, but that's just kind of the way I wanted to make movies back then. But there's still a ton of substance there. You know, it's just not in your face and pandering to you.
Yeah, you've got to look. It's like the great novels. On the first read, you're like, this is so boring. But once you look into it, once you get your foot in the door, you look through the keyhole, you start seeing a lot more. And it's kind of slightly overwhelming.
Yeah, it's. I guess I wouldn't call my film a great novel. I guess I would call it like an interesting enough haiku, because it's not even long enough. But like, it's, you know, hopefully people enjoyed that. But it's time to move on for me. I mean, that was just my way of expressing myself in the rawest way I could, you know.
Yeah.
And this too, this is my way of expressing myself as well, but it's a different new side of me, you know, a more sentimental. I'm trying to provide a new sensibility to my work. I don't want it to all be drab, because there's a lot of dark, and there's really not much tragedy in this film, in School of War, but there is brutality to it. And this, you know, character keeps getting beaten down and rises back up. And it's the same kind of imagery, you know, that's used in Intractable, but it's just more literal here, but it's more honest here. And I'm hoping that I'm starting to move into a direction where things feel like they have much more of a beating heart, you know, and they're not just like sad to make you sad, because I don't want Intractable to feel that way either. I wanted that to have merit, but I want all of my films to feel like it's not just dark because it needs to be dark. I want the tone to fit the film, and not the film fit the tone. So
how would you describe School of War? You called Intractable a rather interesting haiku. What would you say School of War is?
I can't really say directly. I don't really know. I don't know how you can't. I mean, can you put a finger on it? Do you know how to describe it? Because I honestly don't. I don't know where to begin, because it's not really a fan film at all. You know,
a breath of fresh air.
Well,
because because the people who are only familiar with your Intractable and Spider-Man work have yet to see you really do anything this, not incredible, visually pleasing, and it's something that feels like cinema quality. Because straight from the get-go, I was like, if I saw that in a cinema, I would not be able to distinguish that from a normal production.
Well, I really appreciate that, because we shot it. I wanted the film to feel like it belonged on a bigger screen, and I am going to try and screen it at multiple locations, you know? I want each one of my films to feel bigger than the last in every sense, in such a sense that it takes you back, because you're like, wow, that's how much he learned, you know, in this time that he hasn't made a film, you know?
With Intract, it was quite interesting when we saw that it had a budget of, like, was it $30?
Yeah, that was just puffy paint and a burger and gas.
Excluding all equipment costs, because nobody ever likes being reminded how much they spend on equipment. How much would you say School of War, what would you say the budget aside from equipment was?
Well, I didn't really pay for any of the equipment, so, or even rent any of the equipment. But it was only about $600, I guess. The thing about Intractable is I walked to every location that you saw, past like the parts in the town. I walked everywhere with my tripod and my camera and just went out and filmed. Like, we didn't drive really ever. And so with School of War, a lot of that money was gas and food, and you know, we spent probably like $40 on everybody's clothes. So maybe spent a few more hundred on, not hundreds, but we probably spent like 100 on building extra sabers for people to have in their hands. So
you've intrigued me with that one. How were they built? Were they bought from a company, or were they made from bits of old piping and so on?
Some of them are made from pipe fittings, and another one is designed by Ryan Weber, the main kind of head of the LCC, which is a lightsaber choreography competition. I've been watching his stuff since I was like 9, so it was an honor to have his design in my hands and use the novice in the film. And none. I've been completely removed from anything. I've just been working and filming, you know, and I think I've talked to Jesse a lot. Me and him both kind of feel like, especially with this film too, for me, it was just a bunch of friends making a film the best we could. And we were all just really cool with each other. It was just a very relaxed atmosphere. It really was. It was just such a chill kind of like, hey, let's make the best thing we can kind of endeavor. And we did it, you know, with like no money, no help from anybody. And I want to say that it feels pretty professional, and I want that to be how it is all the time. The only thing I want more of is a budget. I want investors to help me, create bigger things, but I don't want it to ever feel like it's not just a bunch of friends making a movie. So that's kind of where I'm at mentally right now. I don't really like big sets as much as you'd think I would. I don't like big crews. I want it to all feel like everybody's kind of in the same bubble and they can step out if they need time and then come back in. It's not just like this huge pressure, like let's bring, this gaffer truck and all these things like that. I'm kind of moving away from the question, but no, I haven't gotten any awards. I've just been kind of doing my thing, and when I feel like I've developed a big enough body of work, or not big enough, but good enough body of work, to give people, to show them that I'm marketable, but also that I know how to handle familiar properties, I'm gonna start promoting myself. But until I get Nascent Nation done, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna be very quiet until things come out, and then I'll be, pretty promotional about, School of War and whatnot when it's out. But at the time, for now, I'm just gonna, skate through everything, worry about life, worry about growing as a person. Then the awards will, if those even matter, like those will come. But that's definitely not a focus of mine.